Hi, my name is Brian, and I'm the High Pop Professor, and welcome to Hobby Numbers Episode 5. Today, I wanted to talk about a facet of autograph authentication that I think is something that needs to be considered. It's certainly not something that I think most people think about, but I wanted to sort of throw my 2 cents in here and give my opinion on this matter because it's something that I think that's something we could learn from when thinking about considering buying autographs and sending those autographs in for authentication, whether it's through Beckett or PSA DNA or JSA. And basically it comes down to this. These companies, when they authenticate their autographs, it's an opinion. They don't have the definitive answer. They don't know 100% whether or not the autograph is genuine or not. I do believe they get it right most of the time. And the crux of what I would like to say in this video is really just to beware the second failed authentication attempt. That's it. And here's the reason why. Last week I put out a video that talked about some of my more recent returns, both for PSA grading, but also for authentication. We had a Beckett authentication order and a PSA one. And over the last 2.5 years that I've been back into the hobby, I've probably sent in, I added them all up, I've sent about 35 cards in for autograph authentication. And of those 35 cards, 36 cards, 31 of them came back as authentic. And 5 of them, now it's a little bit tricky because one of the ones that came back as not authentic, I resent again later and it did get authenticated by a different company. So do we count that as a win, as a loss? I don't know. But let's just say I'm 31 for 36. And so that's like, 85, 86% average, which I think is pretty good. And I've always sort of wondered, well, how good of a job does Beckett authentication do? How good of a job does PSA DNA do? What percentage of the time do they get it right? And it's a fair question. It's a question that is, it's not knowable, what their batting average is for how they authenticate autographs. And I don't even think it's fair for me to compare how I've done with how they would do because of survivorship bias. I get to very carefully pick and choose which listings, which auctions I'm going to go ahead and throw a bid in for or hit the buy it now button on because, look, if it doesn't come with a certain, a COA or a reputable, encapsulation or a good sticker that shows that it's been authenticated already, I'm only going to pull the trigger on an item that I feel really solid about. Looking at an autograph, you've got these different categories where it's like, yes, clearly this looks exactly as it should. Clearly over here, you've got the ones that are awful and terrible fakes. But then you have all the ones in the middle that it's like, well, they kind of look okay-ish, but maybe it was a ballpark signature and they were rushed that day. And so it kind of looks like it should, but it's not exactly the way. And so, I as a collector had the luxury of only going after the ones I really, really like. But companies like PSA DNA, they have to just take in whatever everyone sends to them. And they have to make a judgment call on that. So while I feel like I've done pretty well on that end of things, generally picking ones that are good and that will pass authentication, if I were to be sent 50 items or 50 signatures or 100 of them, that were just sent to me and I had to say yes or no, and really that's the only 2 options there are, I can't with any good confidence say that I would do very well. I don't, would hope I would get over half of them right, but it's tough to say. And so I don't really envy the job that PSA DNA and Beckett and JSA that they have in having to, get their opinions out there and all these things that they're sent to them every single day. So back to the numbers. After all, this is a hobby numbers episode. The question is, how often do they get it right? How often do they miss it? And I'm going to throw some numbers out here. I have no way of knowing if these numbers are at all accurate or at all good, but in absence of anything else, we'll take 2 numbers that I think are reasonable. In my opinion, I feel like these companies, all 3 of them I mentioned, they get it right more often than they get it wrong. In fact, I think overwhelmingly they get it right. So let's run through a little thought exercise here. I'd like to use two different numbers that will make the math pretty easy to do. But stay with me here for a second. Let's assume, on a first case, let's assume that 80% of the time, these authentication companies get it right. That what they say is exactly accurate. Is it high? Is that low? I don't know. Some people out there say that it's closer to 95%. I think that's a little high. Let's start with 80, and we'll go from there. So let's assume that you have an autograph that you want to get authenticated, and it comes back as did not pass. Okay. Well, there's according to our number that we just threw out there, 80% chance that this is indeed not legit, which also means there's only two options. And then the other option is the other 20% of the time, it is legit and they messed up. If you take that autograph, send it to a second company, and again, we assume the same number, 80%, if it returns also not authentic, what you have to consider here is in order for that returned, rejected twice autograph to actually be authentic, then the first company had to get it wrong and the second company had to get it wrong. And so if 80% of the time they are correct, that means that 20% of the time they're wrong. So if you need the first company to be wrong, that's 20%. And so with math, when we're doing and two independent items that both need to happen, in a very specific way, we multiply them together, the probabilities. So 20% chance for the first company being wrong and times 20% chance for the second company being wrong. 0.20 times 0.20 gives us 0.04. That means that there's only a 4% chance that your autograph is authentic because both companies have to be wrong. Or put another way, 96% of the time, that autograph is no good. It's bogus. And so that's a little bit eye-opening. But wait, it gets worse, or maybe it gets better. Let's assume that instead of 80% of the time the companies get it right, what if they get it right 90% of the time? Now, I know some people might disagree with that. There's no way of knowing if this is actually good, but just humor me. Same thing happens. You send the card to two different companies. They both reject it. Well, again, the chances of that card actually being authentic, if we assume 90% accuracy, well, that means that if 90% of the time it's in fact fake, then the other 10% of the time they get it wrong, it's real. And also the other company, remember, they have to get it wrong too. And so there's only a 10% chance for both of them getting it wrong, and 10% times 10%, 0.10 times 0.10 is 0.01, or a 1% chance of that autograph being authentic. 99% of the time, it is fake. So consider that. If you believe that these companies, these authentication companies, get it right between 80 and 90% of the time, which is still the overwhelming majority of times, and you get a second rejection on the same autograph, you have only a 1 to 4% chance that that autograph is real. It's very, very tiny, very, very small. And really, that's all I wanted to say today. So thanks.